Please. My sister is going to die. The words came through the intercom in a whisper. Small, soaked in rain and desperation. They should have meant nothing inside the Obsidian Tower, the most feared address in Gangnam, where 40 of Korea's most dangerous men sat around a table that had witnessed things cities don't survive. But they heard her. Outside, she was 5 years old. A red wool coat with black buttons, drenched through. 2 curly puffs of hair flattened by the downpour. And in both her small, trembling hands, held out like an offering, like a prayer, like the last thing she had left in the world, 1 crumpled dollar bill. Inside, no one moved. No one spoke. Crystal tumblers hovered midair, forgotten. At the head of the table sat James. Jet black hair, dragon tattoos coiling up his neck and hands. A face carved from something colder than marble. A man who had not felt anything in 3 years, not since his brother died in his arms, and had built an empire on the decision never to feel anything again. He stared at the monitor. The child stared back. Then his hand moved, slowly, deliberately, toward the intercom. His entire organization held its breath. Because in 7 years, no one had ever seen James reach for anything that wasn't already his. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Bring her inside. Gently. What happened next didn't just break his rules. It broke the man who made them and built something better from what remained. Stay until the very end. Because what this cold-hearted king does for a child with $1 and nowhere left to turn will rip your heart open and put it back together in ways you never saw coming. Don't forget to subscribe and also comment on your favorite part of the story. Let's dive in. The Obsidian Tower did not have a heartbeat. That was intentional. James had designed it that way. Every floor calibrated for efficiency. Every room stripped of anything that didn't serve a purpose. Every person inside it trained to move like machinery and ask nothing that couldn't be answered with numbers. 41 floors of controlled silence rising above Gangnam like a blade. His empire. His monument to the single truth he had learned 3 years ago in the worst possible way. Feeling things got people killed. He had been different once. Not softer. James had never been soft, but alive in a way that the man sitting at this table no longer recognized. He had laughed at his brother's terrible jokes, had driven Suhan to university on his first day and waited outside for 2 hours in the car because he didn't know how to say he wasn't ready to leave, had loved him with the reckless, unguarded certainty of someone who had never once considered that love could be used against you. Then the ambush. Then the blood. Then Suhan's hand going cold in his while James screamed for help that arrived 6 minutes too late. 6 minutes. He had counted every one of them every day since. The man who walked out of that alley was not the man who had walked in. This version was better, in every way that the underworld measured. Sharper. Colder. Unreadable. His lieutenants obeyed him without question because his silence was heavier than any threat. His enemies kept their distance because a man who feels nothing cannot be bargained with, cannot be manipulated, cannot be broken through the people he loves. He had no people he loved. That was the point. The summit had been moving smoothly. Territory reports, profit margins, the careful choreography of power, when the lobby monitor flickered to the exterior camera. Someone on his security team had made the quiet mistake of routing it to the main screen. Nobody corrected it. Because there she was. 5 years old, maybe less. A red coat, soaked black with rain. 2 little puffs of hair. Both hands stretched forward, holding something so small it was almost invisible. A single crumpled dollar bill offered to a building full of monsters as though she believed, with complete and devastating certainty, that it would be enough. James stared. The room held its breath. The child looked directly into the camera, her enormous dark eyes full of something that had no business existing in a place like this. Hope. His jaw tightened. His hand moved. And somewhere deep beneath 3 years of carefully constructed ice, something shifted. Zara had one rule that Tina had taught her before they left Nairobi. If you ever get lost, find the tallest building you can see and wait. I will always come back to the tallest building. But Tina hadn't come back. And Zara had waited until the sky turned black and the rain started, and the street outside the tiny rented room, filled with strangers who walked past her like she was made of air. So she stopped waiting. Because waiting was for people who had time, and the nurse at the clinic had said, in careful, apologetic English, her hand resting briefly on Zara's shoulder like an apology, that her sister had hours. Not days. Hours. Zara was 5 years old. She knew what hours meant. She had been 8 months old when Tina found her in the Nairobi orphanage. Or that was how Tina always told it, with a laugh that made her whole face change. You were screaming so loud they put you in the back room, and you still kept the whole building awake. I knew right then you were mine. Tina had been 12. Too young to adopt anything, too stubborn to leave without her. She had come back every single day for 4 years until the paperwork finally agreed with what she already knew. They were sisters. That was simply the truth of the world. The scholarship letter had arrived on a Tuesday. Tina had read it 3 times before she let herself cry. And then she had picked Zara up and spun her around their small room until they were both dizzy and laughing, and the letter was crumpled between their hands. Seoul, she had whispered into Zara's hair. We're going to Seoul, baby. We're going to have a home. The journey had taken everything they had saved in 2 years. The documents had cost the rest. Seoul was beautiful and enormous and completely indifferent to them. Tina hadn't minded. She had walked into it like she walked into everything. Chin up, red bag on her shoulder, Zara's hand in hers, certain that brilliance was a language every city eventually learned to speak. Then the men came. Then the shouting. Then Zara, hiding behind the wardrobe the way Tina had taught her, watching through the gap as they took her sister away. The clinic had been 6 blocks from their room. Zara had found it by following the sound of Tina's voice. Weak, barely there, but hers. The nurse had given Zara a cup of warm water and said the words very gently. Hours, sweetheart. Not days. Zara had looked down at the dollar bill in her coat pocket. The one Tina kept for emergencies, for luck, for the days when you needed to believe one small thing could still be enough. Then she had walked out into the rain to find the tallest building in Gangnam. And she had not looked back. Dying, Tina had decided, was not on her schedule. She had not crossed 2 continents, learned 3 logistics software systems, and memorized 47 shipping route algorithms to bleed out on a cot in a back-alley Seoul clinic that smelled like antiseptic and broken promises. She had not held Zara's hand through every hard year in that Nairobi orphanage, had not forged a path through nothing with nothing, had not worn this hot blue sweater 3 days in a row because it was Zara's favorite color, and she had promised to wear something bright on her first day of classes. She had not done any of it to end here, in the dark, with a collapsed lung and no one who knew her name. So she breathed, slowly, deliberately, one breath at a time, like solving a problem. Tina Steele was 22 years old and had been solving problems since before she was old enough to know that most people simply accepted them. The scholarship had been real. The audit file had been real too. A routine logistics review she'd been handed on her 3rd day by a program coordinator who seemed nervous and left too quickly. She had opened it because that was what she did. She read things carefully, thoroughly, the way her grandmother had taught her. Every number tells a story, baby girl. You just have to be patient enough to hear it. The numbers in that file told a story that made her stomach turn cold. Shell companies threaded through 17 legitimate shipping firms. Money moving in patterns too precise to be anything but intentional. Names she recognized from international freight manifests appearing in places they had absolutely no business being. It was Pius' entire financial network, buried inside a logistics document like a knife inside a gift. She had photographed every page before she closed the file. Then she had sewn the micro SD card into the lining of her red handbag with the small sewing kit she always carried, and memorized the rest. She hadn't told anyone. She didn't know who had handed her that file, or why, or whether the coordinator's nervousness meant danger or guilt or both. 24 hours later, the men came. They took her laptop, her phone, most of her air. What they didn't take was the handbag. It had fallen behind the wardrobe in the struggle. And what they couldn't touch was everything locked inside her mind, intact, waiting. She was still holding on to both when the clinic door opened. Footsteps. Unfamiliar. More than one person, moving with the particular quiet of people trained to move quietly. Her eyes opened to slits. Dark shapes. The room tilting. She gathered every remaining piece of strength she had into 4 words. "Where," she whispered, "is my sister?" The medical floor of the obsidian tower had never had a child in it. James noticed this the way he noticed everything, quietly, without expression, filing it somewhere behind his eyes. The room was clean and cold and precisely arranged, built for efficiency and recovery and nothing else. No color, no softness, no concession to the idea that the people who occupied it might be something other than assets requiring maintenance. Zara sat in the center of it, like a small, bright interruption. Her red coat was still damp. Her puffs had dried unevenly. She was clutching the empty paper cup someone had given her with both hands, watching James across the table with enormous dark eyes that contained no fear whatsoever. Only the particular focused attention of a child who has decided that this person matters and is therefore worth understanding completely. He had sat across from warlords with less composure. She looked at his hands first, then slowly up his neck, following the dragon ink with her eyes the way a cartographer traces a coastline. Careful, methodical, genuinely curious. "Is the dragon your friend?" she asked. The question landed somewhere in his chest that he hadn't known still had nerve endings. "No," he said. Then, because she kept looking at him with that devastating patience, "It's a warning." She considered this seriously. "Tina has a scar on her elbow. She says that's a warning too. It means she survived." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the window, and called Jaden. The conversation was brief and precise. Everything he knew about Pius' operation, every thread connecting the assault on Tina to the syndicate's recent territorial movements, every question that didn't yet have an answer. Jaden listened without interrupting. That was why James trusted him. He was the only man in the organization who understood that silence was not emptiness, but architecture. When Tina woke 4 hours later, she spoke for 11 minutes without stopping. Her voice was wrecked and her eyes were glassy with fever, but her mind was a blade, cutting through detail with the precision of someone who had been organizing this information in the dark for days, waiting for someone worthy of it. Pius Network. 5 countries. 17 shell companies. A micro SD card in the lining of a red handbag. By the time she finished, James understood exactly what she was carrying, and exactly what it would cost her to survive it. He was still processing the full weight of that when something slid beneath the medical facility door. A single white card. No signature. 6 words. "Return the American woman, or the child pays the price." The attack came at 3 a.m., which told James everything. Not a rushed decision. Not a reaction. 3 in the morning was a calculated hour, chosen by someone who knew his facility's shift rotation, knew when the corridor cameras completed their cycle, knew precisely how many men stood between the east stairwell and Tina's room. This was not Pius guessing. This was Pius knowing. James's response was quiet and absolute. For minutes, 6 of Pius' men entered the building. None of them left the same way. He stood in the corridor afterward, perfectly still, while his security team swept the floors and Jaden confirmed the perimeter was clear. His expression hadn't changed. It never did. But something behind his eyes had gone very cold in a way that was different from his usual coldness. More focused, more precise. The specific temperature of a man who has just understood that the enemy is not outside the walls. The enemy had a key. He began the hunt the same way he built everything. Quietly, without announcement, laying foundations before anyone realized construction had started. Access logs. Communication records. The invisible architecture of loyalty and its betrayals. On the 3rd day, Tina asked to help. He almost said no. She was sitting up in the medical bed with a borrowed laptop balanced on her knees, her braids pulled back, the bruising along her cheekbones still deep purple against her warm skin. She looked like someone who should be sleeping. She looked like someone who had never once in her life done what she should. "I read networks for a living," she said flatly, when he didn't answer. "Yours isn't that different from a shipping manifest. Every node connects to something. Every gap means something moved that wasn't supposed to." He slid the access logs across the bedside table without a word. She found 3 anomalies in 40 minutes that his own team had missed in 3 days. They didn't discuss it, didn't soften toward each other. The partnership that formed in that room had no warmth in it yet. Only the clean, functional respect of two people who recognize capability without needing to celebrate it. What neither of them discussed was Zara. She was forbidden from the medical wing. House rules, Jaden had explained to her gravely. She had accepted this information and immediately relocated herself to the floor outside James's office, arriving each morning before anyone else, sitting cross-legged against the wall with a patience that shamed most adults. Every morning, James stepped over her without comment. Every morning, without acknowledging it, he gave a quiet order to whoever was nearest. Something warm. For the child. He was still telling himself it meant nothing when Jaden appeared in the doorway on the fourth night, his face carefully neutral in the way that meant the news was not. "I found the communication channel," Jaden said quietly. "James, you need to see who it belongs to." The timestamp was 7 seconds off. That was all. 7 seconds between when Laren's access card logged him out of the communications room and when the exterior camera picked him up in the corridor. 7 seconds that meant nothing to anyone who wasn't looking. 7 seconds that meant everything to a man who had built an empire on the principle that nothing was ever coincidental. James sat alone in his office with the evidence laid out on the desk before him and did not move for a very long time. The communication channel was buried 4 layers deep inside a frequency his organization didn't officially use. A ghost line, dormant for months at a stretch, activated only in precise windows that corresponded, with devastating accuracy, to every significant internal decision James had made in the past 8 months. Every safe house relocation, every territory negotiation, every move that had somehow, inexplicably, met resistance it shouldn't have encountered. 8 months. Laren had been feeding pious intelligence for 8 months. James thought about the morning Suhan died and the way Laren had stood beside him at the funeral. Steady, present, the kind of grief that looked real because it had been designed to look real. He thought about 3 years of briefings and strategies and quiet dinners where Laren had listened carefully and said little, and James had mistaken his patience for loyalty instead of what it actually was. Ambition. Cold, architectural, unhurried ambition. He had built walls to keep sentiment out and never once considered that the threat was already inside them, sitting at his table, learning everything. He turned off the desk lamp. He sat in the dark. He did not call Jaden. Not yet. A man who moves before he understands the full shape of a betrayal makes mistakes. And James could not afford mistakes. Not with Tina's life threaded through this. Not with a 5-year-old sleeping 3 floors down who had handed him a crumpled dollar bill and trusted him with everything she had. He didn't hear the door open. He only knew Tina was there when the chair beside him shifted, and the faint scent of the antiseptic cream from the medical wing reached him in the dark. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't fill the silence with the nervous words most people use to cover their discomfort with someone else's pain. She simply sat beside him, her red handbag in her lap, her eyes forward. Then, quietly, "Tell me when you're ready. I'm not going anywhere." It was the most dangerous thing anyone had said to him in 3 years. The worst part, the part that cracked something open along a fault line he hadn't known still existed, was that he almost believed her. Almost. His phone lit up on the desk between them. A message from an unknown number. One line, no signature. "Tell her the clock just started. She has until midnight to hand over the data. Or we take the girl instead." They took Zara at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Pius' deadline. The transfer between safe houses had been Jaden's most carefully planned operation. Different vehicles, split routes. No communication on any channel that had ever been compromised. It should have been invisible. It would have been, if the man who designed the route hadn't also been the man feeding Pius every detail in real time. Laren's last gift to his employer before he made his final move. James got the call while he was still in the car. He said nothing. His hand tightened once around the phone and then released, deliberately, the way a man releases something he cannot afford to break before he needs it. Tina was already moving when he reached the rooftop command post, still in borrowed clothes, her hot blue sweater fraying at the cuff, the bruising on her cheekbone gone from purple to a sickly yellow-green that somehow made her look more dangerous rather than less. She had her laptop open before anyone told her what happened. She already knew. She had been tracking Pius' network for 72 hours from a stolen tablet, and she understood his patterns now the way she understood shipping manifests, completely, instinctively, one step ahead. Don't, James said. They have my sister. She didn't look up. If you broadcast that data, everything goes loud. There's no quiet resolution after that. No controlled outcome. There was never going to be a quiet resolution. Her fingers were already moving across the keyboard, pulling backdoor credentials from memory. A string of numbers and access codes she had carried inside her head since the night she photographed Pius' files, keeping them there like a weapon she hoped she'd never have to fire. There was only this. I just needed a reason precise enough to use it. She connected to Pius' network in 40 seconds. She began the broadcast sequence in 60. Then she picked up the phone. He answered on the second ring. Of course he did. Men like Pius always answered when they believed they held every card. Her voice came out steady and clean as a blade. You have 30 seconds to release my sister. After that, I release everything. Your buyers. Your accounts. Your names. 30 seconds, Mr. Pius. A pause, measured and deliberate. I suggest you count. 22 seconds of silence. Then Zara's voice, small, terrified, real, came through a different phone across the rooftop. Tina closed her eyes for exactly one breath. Then she hit send anyway. Partial release. Enough to hurt. Enough to prove she meant every word. What she didn't see, what none of them saw until it was already done, was Laren slipping away from his post in the chaos below, his phone already at his ear, his patient 8-month performance finally reaching its last act. By the time anyone noticed he was gone, he had taken something with him. Something small. Something in a red wool coat. The Mapo Bridge at 3 in the morning looked like the end of the world. Rain came down in sheets, turning the Han River below into a black mirror that reflected nothing. The searchlights from Laren's vehicles cut through the dark in cold sweeping arcs, and somewhere in the center of all that light and water stood a 5-year-old girl in a red coat, her small hands gripping the bridge railing, her face tilted away from the edge with the concentrated effort of a child who has been told very precisely not to look down. James arrived alone. As instructed, Laren stood 20 feet away, weapon raised, his face wearing the expression of a man who had been patient for so long that the release of it had curdled into something ugly. 3 years of performed loyalty finally off. He looked lighter for it, in the way that people look lighter when they stop pretending. Step down, Laren said. Transfer control. Walk away. He said it like it was simple. Like 8 months of feeding a child's location to a syndicate leader was a reasonable foundation for negotiation. Do that, and she goes home. James didn't answer. He was looking at Zara. Her puffs were soaked flat again, exactly as they had been outside the obsidian tower 6 days ago. Her coat had a small tear at the left shoulder that hadn't been there before. Her eyes found his across the rain and the distance and the terrible weight of the moment, and she didn't cry. She just looked at him with those enormous dark eyes, steady and waiting, with the specific trust of someone who had already decided, without evidence and without reservation, that he would not fail her. The ghost of Suhan stood in every shadow on that bridge. James felt the familiar paralysis beginning at the edges, the 3-year-old memory of a choice made too slowly, of hands that arrived 6 minutes late, of a brother who trusted him completely and paid for it with everything. Then a sound. Left side. Movement in the dark that didn't belong to Laren's men. Laren heard it too and spun. Half a second. Weapon swinging left toward the shadow of Tina stepping out from the support strut she had reached by a route that appeared on no official map, but existed in the obsessive mental cartography of a woman who never entered any space without knowing exactly how to leave it. She had come for her sister. She had come the only way she knew. Laren's aim broke left. James moved. 1 second. One clear line. 3 years of grief compressed into a single act of absolute precision. Laren went down. James reached the railing in 4 steps and pulled Zara away from the edge and against his chest in one motion, his arms closing around her small shaking body with a force that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the thing he had spent 3 years trying to convince himself he no longer possessed. She wrapped both arms around his neck and held on. And James, the dragon of Gangnam, the man who felt nothing, the machine that had run perfectly for 3 years on ice and silence, and the deliberate erasure of everything soft, stood in the rain on the Mapo Bridge and wept. Quietly, without sound, the tears indistinguishable from the rain on his face. Nobody would ever speak of it. Everyone who mattered already knew. Across the bridge, Tina stood with her red bag clutched to her chest and watched the man who had walked into her sister's life 6 days ago hold that child like she was the most important thing he had ever been given the chance to protect. Her own eyes burned. She let them. Then her phone lit up in her hand. A message from an unknown number she didn't recognize. For words that turned her blood to ice. Pius wants a meeting. 6 months later, Gangnam told a different story. It told it quietly, the way cities absorb change, in the things that stopped happening rather than the things that did. No children disappeared from the streets around the Obsidian Tower's territory. No civilians caught between debts that weren't theirs. No collateral damage written off in the cold language of acceptable loss. The dragon's empire still stood, still commanded the particular silence that falls when genuinely dangerous men enter rooms. But something in its architecture had shifted, and even the people who feared James most had stopped pretending they didn't notice. Pius' network was gone. 5 law enforcement agencies across 5 countries had spent 4 months dismantling it piece by piece. Guided by the data Tina had broadcast from a rooftop in the rain with borrowed credentials and shaking hands. Laren sat in a detention facility awaiting trial. His patients finally cashed in for a cell and a public defender. The syndicate that had beaten a young woman half to death over a logistics file had been reduced to a case number and a set of frozen accounts. Tina's scholarship had been reinstated. She had accepted it, then negotiated 3 consulting contracts alongside it. Seoul's largest logistics firms, her own terms, her own office, her name on the door in clean silver letters. She had done it in her hot blue sweater because Zara had asked her to. Zara had started school on a Tuesday. She had walked in holding Tina's hand, wearing a new red coat with black buttons that James had sent in a plain bag with no note, because he didn't write notes. Her teacher had asked the class to introduce themselves and share one fact about their family. Zara had stood up very straight. "My sister is a genius," she said, "and my guardian is a dragon. A real one." She sat back down with the serene confidence of someone who has stated only obvious truths. Both of these things were accurate. On a Friday afternoon 6 months to the day from when a small girl stood in the rain outside the Obsidian Tower, James arrived at Tina's office without announcement. He crossed the room without greeting, set a small flat envelope on her desk, and stepped back. Inside, behind clean glass in a simple frame, was a single crumpled dollar bill, worn soft at the folds, still carrying the faint watermark of a Seoul rainstorm. Beneath it, in the careful, deliberate handwriting of a child who had recently learned her letters, one line. "This is what it costs to save someone. Everything you have." Tina looked at it for a long time. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing that needed saying that the dollar bill hadn't already said 6 months ago in the rain, in the outstretched hands of a 5-year-old who hadn't known it was impossible and therefore simply hadn't stopped. Below the window, Seoul glittered in the early evening light like a promise. Neither of them looked away. If you enjoy this story, please leave a comment below. Like this video and subscribe to K-Mafia Story HQ to help the channel grow and also keep you up to date with us. You can also leave your suggestion or comment in the comments section. We promise to read every one of them and also act on them. See you soon. Thanks.